The mercantile doors slammed open, letting in a blast of December wind that rattled the glass jars on every shelf. Clara Whitmore stepped inside, snow crusted on her shoulders, her father's emergency money wrapped tight in a leather pouch beneath her coat. The heat from the potbelly stove hit her face like a slap. She needed medicine. Morphine, if they had it. Whiskey and clean bandages, if they didn't. Her father was dying 40 miles north in a cabin that leaked wind through every board, and she had maybe 3 days to get back before the next blizzard buried the valley roads completely. The store went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of folks minding their business. The watching kind. The judging kind. Clara had known this would happen. Red Hollow wasn't her town. It belonged to the railroad wives in their tailored dresses, the merchants who'd gotten rich off land they'd never worked, the society women who gathered in parlors to decide who mattered and who didn't. A blacksmith's daughter, with mud on her boots and patches on her coat, didn't fit their picture of Montana Territory respectability. She walked to the counter anyway. "I need morphine sulfate," Clara said to the clerk, a thin man with spectacles who looked past her like she was smoke. "Or laudanum, if that's all you've got. And 50 feet of cotton bandaging." "Morphine requires a doctor's authorization," the clerk said, not looking up from his ledger. "My father's dying of pneumonia 30 miles from the nearest doctor. I'll pay double." "Store policy." Behind her, someone laughed. Not loud, just enough to sting. Clara turned. 3 women stood near the fabric displays, all dressed in clothes that cost more than her family's entire year of income. She recognized Margaret Dalton, wife of the railroad contractor. The blonde next to her was Sarah Pembroke, married to the bank president. The third woman she didn't know, but the cut of her green velvet dress screamed money. "Look at the size of her," Margaret murmured, just loud enough to carry. "You'd think hauling all that weight around would teach her some shame." "Maybe she ate her last husband," Sarah said. The unknown woman covered her mouth, pretending to hide a smile. "Does she even own a dress, or just that dreadful coat?" Clara's hands tightened on the counter edge. She'd heard worse, years of worse. Growing up fat in a territory that measured women by their waistlines and marriage prospects, she'd learned to swallow insults the way other people swallowed food. But today her father was drowning in his own lungs, and she didn't have time for this. "The morphine," Clara said again to the clerk. "Please. I told you. I heard you the first time. I'm asking you to make an exception." "Store policy doesn't make exceptions for what?" Clara's voice came out harder than she intended. "For people like me?" The clerk's face flushed. "For anyone without proper authorization." "Her father's probably drunk," Margaret said, louder now. "Everyone knows James Whitmore spends more time with a bottle than a forge." That was a lie. A flat, ugly lie. James Whitmore had been sober for 6 years, ever since Clara's mother died, and he'd promised on her grave to raise their daughter right. He'd worked himself half to death keeping that promise, shoeing horses and repairing wagon wheels for customers who paid late or didn't pay at all. Clara turned to face the women fully. "You don't know anything about my father." "We know enough," Sarah said. "We know he couldn't keep his ranch running. We know he raised a daughter who looks like she's never missed a meal while decent people go hungry." The cruelty of it hit Clara square in the chest. She'd skipped breakfast that morning, had skipped most meals for the past 2 weeks, rationing what little food they had left to keep her father's strength up. But these women didn't care about truth. They cared about target practice, and Clara had walked into their range. "I just need medicine," Clara said quietly. "Then I'll leave." "Maybe you should leave now," Margaret said, "before you embarrass yourself further." "Embarrass myself? A woman of your proportions shouldn't draw attention. It's unseemly." The green-dressed woman nodded. "Especially wearing men's trousers. What kind of woman wears trousers in public?" "The kind who rides 40 miles in a blizzard," Clara said. "The kind who doesn't have time to freeze to death in a skirt just to make strangers comfortable." "Such coarse language," Sarah said, shaking her head. "No wonder no respectable man would ever look twice at you." There it was, the real strike. The one these women always aimed for eventually. No husband, no prospects, no value. Clara had heard variations of this her entire adult life. She was 26 years old, unmarried, and built like her blacksmith father instead of her slender mother. In a territory where women were expected to marry young and produce children, she represented failure. A cautionary tale. The girl nobody wanted. Most days she'd learned not to care. Today, with her father dying and her pride already shredded, it hit differently. "You're right," Clara said, her voice steady despite the heat crawling up her neck. "No respectable man has ever looked twice at me. I'm fat. I'm poor. I wear trousers and work like a ranch hand and probably smell like horses most days. You figured me out completely." Margaret blinked, surprised. "Well, at least you're self-aware." "Oh, I'm aware of a lot of things," Clara continued. "I'm aware that you're all standing here in a warm store, wearing expensive dresses, mocking a woman who rode through a snowstorm to save her father's life. I'm aware that not one of you has ever worked a day hard enough to break a sweat. And I'm aware that when you go home tonight to your comfortable houses and your hired help, you'll tell this story like you're the heroes in it." Sarah's smile vanished. "How dare you?" "I dare because I've got nothing left to lose," Clara said. "My father's dying. My ranch is failing. I'm standing here begging for medicine from a clerk who won't sell it to me because I don't have the right paperwork or the right last name. So yes, I'm coarse. Yes, I'm inappropriate. And yes, I'm everything you think I am. But at least I'm not cruel for entertainment." The silence that followed felt like ice cracking. Then the mercantile door opened again. The temperature in the room changed instantly. Clara felt it before she saw him, a shift in attention, a sudden tension that pulled every eye toward the entrance. Elias Boone stepped inside, snow-dusting the shoulders of his dark wool coat. Clara knew who he was. Everyone in Montana Territory knew who he was. Elias Boone owned the largest cattle operation within 200 miles, controlled water rights that made or broke smaller ranches, and had a reputation for being harder than the winter that had nearly killed him during his first year on the frontier. People said he'd arrived in Montana with nothing but a horse and a rifle. Now he owned more land than some eastern states. He was 43 years old, built like he'd been carved from the same granite as the mountains, and had eyes that didn't waste time on bullshit. Those eyes swept the mercantile, took in the scene. Clara standing alone, the three society women near the fabrics, the nervous clerk behind the counter, and settled on Clara's face. For one horrible moment, Clara thought he might join the mockery. Wealthy men didn't defend poor women. They especially didn't defend fat women in patched coats who'd just insulted half the town's social elite. Elias walked past the three women without acknowledging them. He stopped directly beside Clara. "You need morphine?" he asked. His voice was rough, worn smooth in places like old leather. Not unkind, just direct. Clara's throat tightened. "My father's sick. The clerk says I need authorization." Elias turned to the clerk. "Sell her the morphine." "Mr. Boone, store policy requires—" "I don't care about your policy. Sell her the medicine or I'll buy this entire store and fire you before the sun sets." The clerk went pale. "Sir, the morphine. Now." The clerk's hand shook as he reached for the shelf behind him. Within 30 seconds, he'd wrapped 2 bottles of morphine sulfate and a roll of cotton bandaging, setting them on the counter like they might explode. "How much?" Clara asked, reaching for her money pouch. "It's paid for," Elias said. "I can pay for my own." "I know you can, but you rode 40 miles in a storm. You shouldn't have to fight for medicine too." Elias pulled a roll of bills from his coat and dropped more than enough on the counter to cover the supplies twice over. Then he turned to face the 3 women who were still watching in frozen silence. "Margaret, Sarah, Mrs. Patterson." So the green dress was Patterson. Clara filed that away. "Mr. Boone," Margaret said, recovering her smile, "we were just— I heard what you were doing." Elias didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. The words landed like stones. "And I'll say this once, so everyone in this room hears it clearly." He looked at Clara, then back at the 3 women. "That woman standing there is worth more than everyone in this room combined." The statement hit like a thunderclap. Margaret's face flushed scarlet. "Excuse me?" "She rode through a blizzard to save her father. She runs a failing ranch alone because she refuses to quit. She works harder before breakfast than most men work all week. And instead of helping her, you stood here tearing her down for entertainment." "We were just making conversation." "You were being cruel," Elias said flatly. "There's a difference." Sarah stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Mr. Boone, I hardly think it's appropriate for you to lecture us about— I don't care what you think is appropriate. I care that you treated someone with more backbone than this whole town like dirt beneath your shoes. Elias picked up the medicine and bandages, handing them to Clara. If I ever hear about any of you treating her this way again, I'll make sure your husbands know exactly where their business relationships stand. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. Margaret opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. This is ridiculous. She's nobody. She's someone who matters more than you ever will, Elias said. Now get out of my sight before I say something I won't regret. The three women fled the mercantile like smoke before wind. The store returned to silence. A different kind this time. Shocked. Uncomfortable. Clara stood frozen, the medicine clutched in her hands, fury and humiliation burning through her chest in equal measure. Elias Boone had just defended her, publicly, in front of witnesses. He'd called her worth more than the wealthiest women in Red Hollow, threatened their husbands' business connections, and sent them running with their tails between their legs. And Clara hated every second of it. I didn't need your help, she said, her voice low. Elias looked at her. I know. Then why did you? Because you shouldn't have to fight that battle alone. I've been fighting it my whole life. I didn't ask for rescue. I wasn't rescuing you, Elias said. I was correcting a wrong. By humiliating me in front of the whole town? That caught him off guard. Clara saw it in the slight tightening around his eyes. I didn't mean to, You just told everyone in Red Hollow that I'm so pathetic I need Elias Boone to fight my battles. Clara's hands shook with anger. Do you have any idea what those women will say now? What everyone will say? They'll say I'm either your charity case or your... She stopped, the word catching in her throat. Or my what? Elias asked quietly. Clara didn't answer. Didn't need to. They both knew what the gossip would be. Poor fat Clara Whitmore had caught the attention of wealthy Elias Boone. It must be pity. Or worse, some kind of arrangement. Rich men didn't defend women like Clara unless they wanted something. The rumors would spread like wildfire. I should go, Clara said. My father needs this medicine. She turned toward the door. Miss Whitmore. Clara stopped but didn't turn around. I meant what I said, Elias continued. You're worth more than all of them combined, and I'm not sorry for saying it. Clara left without responding. She made it halfway down Red Hollow's main street before the shaking started. Not from cold, from rage, from humiliation, from the terrible, unwanted feeling of being seen, truly seen, by someone she couldn't afford to trust. Elias Boone had looked at her like she mattered, and that terrified her more than all the mockery in the world. Bitches and scum. Clara pushed her horse hard on the ride home, trying to outrun the memory of the mercantile. It didn't work. The scene replayed in her head with every mile, Elias's voice steady and certain. That woman's worth more than everyone here combined. Nobody had ever said anything like that about her. Not once in 26 years. And she didn't believe it for a second. Men like Elias Boone didn't defend women like Clara Whitmore out of genuine respect. They did it out of pity, or amusement, or because they enjoyed playing the hero in front of an audience. Rich men collected causes the way other people collected debts. Today, Clara had become Elias Boone's latest project, and tomorrow he'd forget she existed. The anger kept her warm through the worst of the cold. By the time Clara reached the Whitmore Ranch, if you could still call it that, the sun had dropped behind the mountains, turning the snow purple with twilight. The ranch wasn't much. Never had been. A cabin her father had built with his own hands, a leaning barn that needed more repair than wood, a corral that held exactly 3 horses and a milk cow on her last legs. 15 years ago, they'd run 30 head of cattle and actually turned a profit. Then her mother died, her father's spirit broke, and the ranch started dying with him. Now they were down to 5 cattle, all too old or too sick to sell, and land so mortgaged that Clara could feel the bank's shadow creeping closer every season. But it was home. And Clara would fight for it until there was nothing left to fight with. She found her father in bed right where she'd left him, his breathing wet and labored. James Whitmore had been a big man once, strong enough to work iron into submission, loud enough to fill a room with laughter. Now he looked small beneath the quilts, his face gray with fever, his hands trembling on top of the blankets. Clara? His voice came out as a rasp. I'm here, Pa. Clara set the medicine on the table and knelt beside the bed. Got the morphine. You're going to be all right. You shouldn't have gone. Storm's coming. Storm's always coming. Clara measured out a careful dose of morphine into a spoon. Open up. Her father swallowed the medicine without complaint, then closed his eyes with a sigh that sounded like surrender. Did they give you trouble in town? He asked. Clara didn't answer right away. She busied herself with changing the bandages on his chest, checking the poultices she'd applied that morning. The pneumonia had settled deep in his lungs. She could hear it in every breath, a rattling sound like stones in a bucket. Nothing I couldn't handle, she finally said. You're a terrible liar. Then stop asking questions you don't want answered. James managed a weak smile. That's my girl. Tough as nails. Tough as the nails you made, Clara corrected. You taught me that. I taught you too much. Should have taught you to be softer, prettier, the kind of girl who gets married and has babies instead of what? Being useful? Clara pulled the blankets up to his chin. I like being useful, Pa. It's better than being decorative. Your mother was both. Clara's chest tightened. Her mother had been beautiful, the kind of beautiful that made people stop and stare. Delicate features, a tiny waist, hands that had never seen hard labor until she married a blacksmith and moved to Montana. Clara had inherited exactly none of that. She'd gotten her father's build, her father's stubbornness, her father's talent for making things work through sheer force of will. Mama was special, Clara said. I'm not. Don't say that. It's true, and it's fine. I've made peace with it. James looked at her with fever-bright eyes. No, you haven't. Clara stood, putting distance between them. Get some rest. I'll check on you in a few hours. Clara, rest, Pa. She escaped to the kitchen before he could argue further. The cabin was cold despite the fire she'd banked before leaving that morning. Wind whistled through gaps in the boards, carrying the promise of worse weather to come. Clara checked their food supplies. Dangerously low. Checked their firewood. Lower. Checked their financial situation by looking at the ledger on the shelf. Catastrophic. They had maybe 6 weeks before the bank came calling. 6 weeks to somehow earn enough money to make the mortgage payment, buy supplies, and keep the ranch functioning through the worst of winter. It was impossible. Clara had known it was impossible for months, but she kept working anyway, because the alternative was surrender. And Clara Whitmore didn't know how to do that. She spent the evening doing the kind of work that never ended, mending torn leather, sharpening tools, calculating and recalculating numbers that refused to add up to survival. Around midnight, she checked on her father again. The morphine had helped. His breathing came easier and the fever had dropped slightly. It wouldn't last. Morphine treated symptoms, not causes. Without a real doctor, without proper medicine, her father was dying by degrees. Clara knew this, had known it for weeks. She just didn't know what to do about it. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Clara lay in her narrow bed, listening to wind hammer the cabin walls, and tried not to think about Elias Boone's words. That woman's worth more than everyone here combined. Lies. Had to be lies. Men didn't see worth in women like Clara. They saw labor. They saw utility. They saw someone who could work like a man and wouldn't complain about it. But they didn't see worth. Clara rolled over, punching her flat pillow into a different shape, and forced her eyes closed. Tomorrow she'd work. Tomorrow she'd keep the ranch running. Tomorrow she'd prove she didn't need Elias Boone's defense, or his pity, or whatever the hell that scene in the Mercantile had been about. Tomorrow she'd be fine. Doubt. She wasn't fine. The storm hit 3 days later, meaner than any December blizzard had a right to be. Wind screamed down from the mountains, driving snow so thick Clara couldn't see the barn from the cabin door. Temperature dropped to 20 below zero, then 30, then stopped being measurable by anything except pain. Clara spent the first day battling frozen water lines, breaking ice in the animal troughs every 2 hours, and hauling enough firewood to keep the cabin from becoming a tomb. Her father's fever spiked again despite the morphine. His coughing got worse. By nightfall, he was barely conscious. The second day, one of the horses died. Just laid down in the barn and didn't get up. Clara found it in the morning, frozen stiff, its eyes still open. She dragged the carcass outside and left it for the wolves. The third day, the roof started leaking. Clara patched it with tar paper and rage, working in wind that tried to rip her off the roof entirely. She made it down alive, soaked in freezing water, her hands so cold she couldn't feel her fingers. That night, someone knocked on the cabin door. Clara grabbed her rifle, because nobody honest came calling in a blizzard, and cracked the door open. Elias Boone stood on her porch, covered in snow, holding a crate of supplies. "You shouldn't be here," Clara said. "I know." Elias didn't move. "Can I come in?" "Why?" "Because I brought medicine, real medicine, and firewood, and food." He nodded toward the wagon barely visible through the snow. "Enough to get you through the next 2 weeks, at least." Clara's grip tightened on the rifle. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity. It's—" "What? Pity? Guilt? Whatever happened in that mercantile eating at your conscience?" Elias met her eyes. Snow gathered on his shoulders, his hat, his eyelashes. He looked tired. Not tired like he'd ridden through a storm, tired like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long. "It's decency," he said simply. "Your father's dying. Your ranch is failing. I can help." "I didn't ask for your help." "I know, but I'm offering anyway." "Why?" Clara demanded. "Why would you risk riding through this storm to help someone you don't even know? What do you want from me?" Elias was quiet for a long moment, then, "Nothing. I want nothing from you." "Nobody helps for nothing." "Then I'll be the first." Elias shifted the crate in his arms. "I saw you in that mercantile, standing there taking abuse from women who wouldn't last one day doing the work you do. And I saw something those women will never understand." "What?" "Someone who refuses to break." Claire's throat went tight. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough. Are you going to let me bring this inside, or are we both going to freeze to death having this conversation on your porch?" Against every instinct screaming at her to slam the door, Clara stepped aside. Elias carried the crate to the kitchen table and started unpacking. Real antibiotics from a doctor in Helena, clean bandages, canned food, coffee, sugar, flour. Things Clara hadn't seen in months, things she couldn't afford and hadn't dared hope for. "How's your father?" Elias asked. "Dying slower than he was 3 days ago." Clara set the rifle down but stayed near it. "The morphine helped. The antibiotics will help more." Elias pulled out a brown bottle. "Sulfanilamide. Give him 2 tablets every 6 hours. It won't cure pneumonia, but it'll give his body a fighting chance." Clara took the bottle like it might vanish. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing." "Everything has a price." "Not this." "Mr. Boone." "Elias," he said, "if I'm going to keep showing up uninvited, you might as well use my name." "You're not going to keep showing up." "Yes, I am." Elias started unpacking the rest of the supplies. "Your roof's leaking. Your water lines are frozen. You're running this ranch alone while nursing a dying man through a blizzard. You need help." "I've been managing." "Barely." The truth of it stung more than Clara wanted to admit. Elias finished unpacking and turned to face her fully. "I'm not here to insult you. I'm here because I've been where you are. Alone. Failing. Too proud to ask for help. And I survived because one person decided I was worth saving even when I didn't believe it myself. I'm not a charity case. I never said you were." Elias pulled his gloves back on. "But I'm not going to watch you die of stubbornness when I can prevent it." "Why do you care?" Elias paused at the door. "Because someone should. And because those women in the mercantile were wrong about you. You're not nobody. You're not worthless. You're the strongest person I've met in 20 years on this frontier." He left before Clara could respond. She stood in her kitchen, surrounded by supplies she hadn't earned and didn't deserve, and felt something crack open in her chest that she'd kept sealed for years. Someone believed she was worth saving, and Clara didn't know what the hell to do with that. The antibiotics worked. Not like a miracle. Nothing in Clara's life had ever worked like a miracle. But slowly, grudgingly, the way ice melts in spring. James Whitmore's fever broke on the 4th day. His breathing cleared on the 5th. By the end of the 1st week, he was sitting up in bed, complaining about the food, which meant he was going to live. Clara should have felt relief. Instead, she felt debt. Elias Boone had saved her father's life, and Clara didn't know how to repay that kind of kindness without surrendering something she couldn't afford to lose. Pride, maybe. Independence, definitely. The careful distance she'd built between herself and everyone who might hurt her. She spent those first days after Elias's visit working herself half to death, trying to prove she didn't need more help. She repaired the roof properly, reinforced the barn walls, broke ice in the water troughs until her shoulders screamed. The storm finally broke after 9 days, leaving the world buried under 4 feet of snow and a silence so complete it felt like the frontier was holding its breath. Clara was hauling firewood from the barn when she saw the rider coming up the valley. She knew who it was before he got close enough to identify. Something about the way he sat a horse, straight-backed, certain, like the animal beneath him was an extension of his own will rather than a separate creature. Elias Boone reined in near the corral and dismounted without waiting for an invitation. "Your father doing better?" he called out. Clara dropped the armload of wood near the cabin door. "He's alive, thanks to you. Thanks to the medicine, which you brought." Elias walked closer, his boots crunching in the snow. "I came to check the roof. Make sure my tar paper's holding." "Your tar paper?" "I brought it last visit. Figured you'd use it." Clara had used it, every inch. "The roof's fine." "Good." Elias looked around the ranch, taking in the leaning barn, the struggling livestock, the fence posts that needed replacing before spring. His face didn't change, but Clara saw the assessment happening behind his eyes. He was calculating failure, measuring the distance between what this place was and what it needed to be to survive. "You can say it," Clara said. "Say what?" "That this place is dying, that I'm fighting a losing battle, that I should sell while there's still something left to sell." Elias met her eyes. "Is that what you want to hear?" "No, but it's what everyone else says." "I'm not everyone else." Elias nodded toward the barn. "Your water lines still frozen?" "I thawed them yesterday." "Show me." It wasn't a request exactly, but it wasn't an order either. Clara found herself leading him to the barn anyway, irritated at how easily he'd maneuvered her into compliance. Inside, the barn was warmer than outside, but not by much. The 3 surviving horses and the ancient milk cow stood in their stalls, breath steaming in the cold air. Clara had done her best to keep them comfortable, but her best wasn't enough. They needed better feed, warmer shelter, and care she couldn't afford to provide. Elias walked the length of the barn without speaking, checking the stalls, the feed storage, the structural beams. He moved like a man who'd built and rebuilt his share of barns, who understood the language of wood and stone and failing infrastructure. Finally, he turned back to Clara. "You need help. I'm aware. Real help. Not just medicine and supplies. Someone to work this place with you." Clara's spine stiffened. "I can handle it. You're one person trying to do the work of 5. Even if you could manage it physically, which you can't, you shouldn't have to. I don't have a choice. Everyone has choices." "Not everyone has good ones," Clara shot back. "I can work myself to death trying to save this ranch, or I can surrender and watch the bank take everything my father built. Those are my options. I've chosen the one that lets me sleep at night." Elias studied her for a long moment. "What if there was a third option?" "There isn't. What if I helped you run this place properly, not just dropping off supplies and riding away? Actually working it with you until you're stable enough to manage alone?" Clara laughed. She couldn't help it. The suggestion was so absurd it bypassed anger and went straight to bitter amusement. "You want to work my failing ranch? You, who owns half the territory? What possible reason could you have for that?" "Because I'm a rancher," Elias said simply. "And watching good land die because someone doesn't have help offends me." "This isn't good land. It's barely functional land." "It could be good. With work." "I don't need your pity." "I'm not offering pity. I'm offering partnership." The word landed like a stone between them. Clara shook her head. "No, absolutely not." "Why not?" "Because partnerships require trust, and I don't trust wealthy men who show up offering help for free. There's always a price. There's always something they want." "What do you think I want?" Elias asked, his voice calm. "I don't know. That's the problem." Clara crossed her arms. "Maybe you want to buy my land cheap after I fail. Maybe you want to control the water rights. Maybe you just enjoy playing savior to desperate women. I don't know your angle, Mr. Boone, but I know you have one. My angle is preventing waste." "Waste? You're a good rancher, better than half the men I employ. This land could produce if it had proper support. Right now it's dying because you're trying to save it alone, and nobody can do that, not even you." Elias paused. "I'm offering to help because I've been in your position. I know what it's like to be one bad season away from losing everything, And I remember the people who helped me when I had nothing to offer in return. So this is about your conscience? This is about recognizing someone worth investing in. Claire's throat tightened. I can't pay you. I don't want payment. Then what do you want? Elias was quiet for a beat too long. When he spoke, his voice was different, rougher, more honest. To see what happens when someone like you gets an actual chance instead of just scraps. The words hit Clara harder than she expected. She'd spent her whole life fighting for scraps, fighting to be seen as competent instead of worthless, fighting to prove that her weight, her gender, her poverty didn't define her worth. And here was Elias Boone, the wealthiest rancher in Montana Territory, suggesting she deserved more than that. It felt like a trap. It felt like hope. Clara didn't trust either sensation. I need to think about it, she said. Fair enough. Elias moved toward the barn door, then stopped. For what it's worth, those women in the mercantile are still talking about you. Clara's stomach dropped. What are they saying? That you've bewitched me. That I've lost my mind. That a man of my standing has no business associating with someone of your circumstances. Elias's mouth twisted. The usual poison. Then maybe you should stop associating with me. Save yourself the reputation damage. I don't care about my reputation. You should. Reputation is currency in places like Red Hollow. Then I'll spend mine however I want. Elias looked at her directly. I meant what I said in that mercantile, Miss Whitmore. You're worth more than all of them combined. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to make small-minded people comfortable. He left before Clara could form a response. She stood in the barn, surrounded by dying livestock and failing infrastructure, and tried to figure out what the hell had just happened. Elias Boone wanted to work her ranch, with her, as partners. It was insane. It was suspicious. It was the only real offer of help she'd received in 6 years of watching this place slowly collapse. Clara didn't trust it, but she was running out of options to refuse. That night, she told her father about Elias's offer. James was sitting up in bed, looking more alive than he had in weeks. The antibiotics had given him back his color, his strength, his stubborn refusal to die quietly. He listened to Clara's explanation without interrupting, his weathered face unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. What do you want to do? He finally asked. I want to say no. I want to tell him to take his help and his partnership and his confusing motivations and leave us alone. But we're going to lose this place if something doesn't change. Clara sat in the chair beside his bed, exhaustion catching up with her all at once. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. The livestock is dying. I'm working every hour I'm awake, and it's not enough. It's never enough. So accept his help. I don't trust him. Why not? Clara struggled to put it into words. Because men like Elias Boone don't help women like me unless they want something. And I can't figure out what he wants, which means it's probably something I can't afford to give. James reached out and took her hand. His grip was weak but steady. Maybe he just wants to help. Nobody's that kind. Some people are. Her father squeezed her fingers. Your mother was that kind. She helped people because it was the right thing to do, not because she expected anything back. Mama was a saint. Elias Boone is a cattle baron. Even cattle barons can be decent. James studied her face. What are you really afraid of, Clara? The question caught her off guard. Clara pulled her hand back, standing up to put distance between them. I'm not afraid. You're terrified. I can see it. Of what? Losing the ranch? I've been preparing for that for years. No, you're afraid of him. That's ridiculous. Is it? James's voice was gentle. He looks at you like you matter, like you're not just the fat girl nobody wanted, and that scares you worse than poverty ever could. Clara's chest went tight. Don't. Don't what? Tell the truth? Don't pretend you know what I'm thinking. I'm your father. I've known what you're thinking since you were old enough to think it. James leaned back against his pillows, looking suddenly older. You've spent your whole life believing you don't deserve kindness because of how you look. Every insult, every rejection, every cruel word from people who should have known better. You collected them all and built a wall to keep everyone out. That wall kept me safe. It kept you alone, James corrected. There's a difference. Clara turned away, staring out the window at the snow-covered valley. I don't know how to trust this. Then don't trust it. Test it. Let him help for a week and see what happens. If he's running a con, you'll spot it. You're too smart not to. And if he's genuine, James trailed off. If he's genuine, then what? Then maybe you let yourself have something good for once. The words sat heavy in the cold cabin air. Clara didn't sleep well that night. She lay in bed, listening to the wind and thinking about partnership and trust and all the ways this could go wrong. By the time dawn broke, she still hadn't decided, but when Elias showed up 3 days later with a wagon full of lumber and tools, Clara didn't send him away. "We need to fix the barn first," she said instead. Elias nodded like he'd been expecting exactly that response. "Show me what needs doing." They worked in silence for the first hour, Clara pointing out structural problems while Elias assessed and planned. He moved with the efficiency of someone who'd built more than his share of buildings, measuring twice and cutting once, wasting neither lumber nor motion. "You've done this before," Clara observed, holding a beam steady while Elias secured it. "Built my first barn when I was 17. Did it wrong. Collapsed the first winter." He drove a nail home with 3 precise strikes. "Built it again the next year. Did it right. Still standing." "What changed between the first and second try?" "I stopped being too proud to ask for help." Clara caught the subtext but didn't respond. They worked through the morning, replacing rotted boards and reinforcing weak joints. Elias didn't talk much, and Clara appreciated that. Most men felt compelled to fill silence with their own voices. Elias seemed comfortable letting the work speak instead. Around noon, Clara went inside to check on her father and make coffee. When she returned to the barn, she found Elias studying the fence line that ran along the eastern pasture. "This used to connect to a bigger property," he said. It wasn't a question. "My father had 80 acres once, sold off 60 of it to pay debts after my mother died." "Who bought it?" "Different people. The bank took some. A land speculator from Helena took the rest." "The speculator have a name?" Clara hesitated. "Why?" "Because I'm curious who owns the land surrounding your property." "A company called Western Frontier Holdings. They've been buying up failing homesteads all over the valley." Something shifted in Elias's expression, a tightening around his eyes that suggested recognition. "I know them. They're trouble." "They're vultures," Clara corrected. "They wait for people to fail, then buy the land for nothing and resell it for profit." "They're worse than vultures. Vultures at least wait for things to die naturally." Elias turned to face her. "How much do you owe the bank?" "That's my business." "It's our business if we're partners." The word still sounded strange. Partners. Like Clara was something other than a burden. $300, she admitted. "Due in 8 weeks." Elias didn't flinch at the number, which told Clara it was pocket change to him. "That's manageable." "Not for me. For us." He gestured at the ranch, the land, the struggling livestock. "If we work this place right, we can generate enough income to cover that and more." "In 8 weeks? That's impossible." "Difficult. Not impossible." Elias started walking back toward the barn. "Your land has good water access. The soil's decent. You've got grazing capacity for at least 50 head of cattle if we repair the fencing." "I have 5 cattle, all of them ancient. I have cattle, more than I need for my current range." He glanced at her. "What if we ran some of my stock on your land? Split the profits?" Clara stopped walking. "Why would you do that?" "Because you have grazing capacity and I have excess livestock. It's practical." "It's charity." "It's business," Elias countered. "I pay for grazing rights all over the territory. Why not pay you instead?" "Because this feels like you're trying to save me again." "Maybe I'm trying to save your land. There's a difference." Clara wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. She had land. He had cattle. Together, they could make something work that neither could manage alone. It was still terrifying. "1 month," Clara said finally. "We try this for 1 month. If it doesn't work, you take your cattle and leave me alone. And if it does work, then we renegotiate." Elias extended his hand. Clara looked at it for a long moment, calloused, weathered, steady, before she shook it. His grip was firm but not crushing. Professional. The handshake of someone who meant business. Clara tried to ignore the fact that her heart was racing. The next 2 weeks blurred into a rhythm of constant work. Elias arrived every morning before dawn and stayed until after dark. working alongside Clara like he'd been born to this failing ranch instead of his own empire. They repaired fencing, reinforced the barn, cleared snow from the pastures, and prepared the land for the cattle that would arrive the following week. Clara had expected Elias to supervise while she did the physical labor. Instead, he worked harder than most ranch hands she'd ever seen. He hauled lumber, dug post holes in frozen ground, and spent an entire day on the roof repairing damage Clara hadn't been able to reach. He didn't complain, didn't brow, just worked. It was infuriating how competent he was. "You're enjoying this," Clara said one afternoon, watching him wrestle a fence post into position. "Enjoying what?" "Physical labor, getting your hands dirty, pretending you're not the richest man in the territory." Elias paused, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold. "I started as a ranch hand, worked my way up from nothing. Sometimes I miss when the problems were simple. Fix a fence, feed the cattle, survive the winter." "You think this is simple?" "Simpler than managing an empire. At least here, if you work hard enough, you see results." Clara hammered a nail into the crossbeam. "And if you don't work hard enough?" "Then you fail. But at least you fail honestly." There was something raw in his voice that made Clara look up. Elias was staring at the fence line, but his eyes were somewhere else entirely. "You sound like you've failed before," she said. "Everyone fails. The question is whether you get back up." "Did you?" "Eventually." Elias returned his attention to the fence post, driving it deeper into the frozen earth. "I lost my first ranch to a bad winter and worse decisions. Spent 2 years working other people's land, saving every penny, learning from my mistakes. When I finally bought my second property, I swore I'd never fail like that again." "And you haven't?" "Not the same way, different ways. Failure's creative like that." Clara found herself almost smiling. "That's a depressing philosophy. It's an honest one." They worked in silence for a while, the sound of hammers and saws filling the cold air. Clara's hands ached, her back screamed, and her shoulders felt like they might separate from her body. But there was something satisfying about seeing the fence take shape, about watching the ranch transform from dying to functional. For the first time in years, Clara felt something dangerous: hope. The cattle arrived on a Tuesday morning, 50 head of healthy stock driven by 2 of Elias's ranch hands. Clara watched them flow into her pastures like a river of brown and white, their breath steaming in the cold air, and felt her chest tighten with something she couldn't name. This was real. This was happening. Elias rode beside her, surveying the herd with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent his life evaluating livestock. "They'll do well here. Good grazing, clean water, enough space to roam. How long do we keep them?" "Through winter. Come spring, we'll drive them to the railroad and sell. Split the profits 60-40. Clara's head snapped around. 60-40 in whose favor? Yours. That's not fair, they're your cattle. On your land, you're providing grazing, water, and oversight. That's worth 40%. This is your investment. It's our partnership, Elias corrected, and partnerships are only sustainable if both people benefit. Clara wanted to argue, but the numbers were already spinning through her head. 40% of 50 cattle sold at market price minus expenses. It might actually be enough to cover the mortgage and then some. It might actually save the ranch. "This is too generous," she said quietly. "It's fair. There's a difference." One of Elias's ranch hands, a weathered man named Cooper, rode over. "Boss, we're done with the fence check. Everything's secure." "Good. Take the boys back to the main ranch. I'll stay and help Miss Whitmore get the herd settled." Cooper's eyes flickered between Elias and Clara, curiosity naked on his face. But he was smart enough not to ask questions. "Yes, sir." After the ranch hands left, Clara and Elias spent the afternoon moving cattle into different sections of the pasture, ensuring even distribution and checking for any animals that looked stressed from the journey. It was the kind of work Clara had done 1,000 times, but doing it alongside someone competent made it feel different, easier, like she wasn't carrying the entire weight of survival alone. "You're good at this?" Elias said as they drove the last few stragglers toward the water trough. "At what?" "Reading animals, knowing which ones need attention and which ones just need space." Clara shrugged. "My father taught me. Said cattle are like people. Most of them are fine if you leave them alone, but some need help whether they want it or not." "Smart man, your father. He has his moments." They finished as the sun dropped behind the mountains, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of purple and gold. Clara stood at the fence line watching the cattle settle for the night and felt something unfamiliar loosen in her chest. Pride, maybe. Or satisfaction. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't fighting a losing battle anymore. "You should go home," Clara said to Elias. "It's getting dark." "I will. But first," Elias pulled something from his saddlebag and handed it to her. It was a ledger. New, leather-bound, with blank pages ready to be filled. "What's this for?" "Tracking everything. Cattle numbers, expenses, income, dates. If we're going to be partners, we need to keep proper records." Clara opened the ledger, running her fingers over the clean pages. "I've never been good at paperwork. Nobody's good at it, but it's necessary." Elias mounted his horse. "I'll be back tomorrow. We need to discuss feed schedules and winter health checks." "You don't have to come every day." "I know, but I'm going to anyway." He rode off before Clara could protest, disappearing into the twilight like smoke. Clara stood alone in her newly populated pastures, holding a ledger she didn't ask for, watching cattle she couldn't afford graze on land she was about to lose, and felt the careful walls she'd built around herself start to crack. Elias Boone was keeping his promises. He was working the ranch, investing his resources, and treating her like an actual partner instead of a charity case. And Clara didn't know what scared her more, the possibility that he might fail her eventually, or the possibility that he wouldn't. That night, she showed her father the ledger. James smiled like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. "He's courting you, you know." Clara nearly dropped the book. "He's doing no such thing." "Clara, I wasn't born yesterday. He's helping with the ranch. That's business, not courtship. Business doesn't require him to show up every single day. Business doesn't require new ledgers and careful partnership agreements. Business is a handshake and a contract." James's eyes were knowing. What Elias is doing is something else entirely. "You're reading too much into it." "Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a man trying to prove himself to a woman who doesn't believe she deserves proving for." Clara's throat went tight. "Stop. You like him." "I respect his work ethic." "You like him," James repeated. "And that terrifies you because you've spent your whole life believing men like him don't look at women like you." "They don't." "He does, and you know it." Clara stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I'm going to bed. Running away doesn't change the truth. Neither does acknowledging it." She escaped to her room before her father could deliver another uncomfortable truth. But sleep didn't come easily. Clara lay in the dark, thinking about partnership and ledgers and the way Elias looked at her like she was someone worth investing in. It was dangerous. It was terrifying. It was the closest thing to hope she'd felt in years. And Clara didn't trust hope any more than she trusted wealthy ranchers with confusing motivations. But maybe, just maybe, she was tired of fighting alone. The gossip started exactly when Clara knew it would. By the end of the first week of their partnership, Red Hollow was buzzing with speculation about Clara Whitmore and Elias Boone. The stories varied depending on who was telling them, but the core message stayed the same. Something inappropriate was happening between the territory's wealthiest rancher and the fat girl nobody wanted. Clara heard about it from the general store clerk, who mentioned it while selling her coffee. She heard it from a neighbor who rode past the ranch and saw Elias working the fence line. She heard it in the careful silence that fell whenever she walked into a room in Red Hollow. The worst came from Margaret Dalton, who cornered Clara outside the feed store 2 weeks into the partnership. "Everyone's talking about you," Margaret said, her voice dripping with false concern. "About you and Mr. Boone," Clara finished loading her wagon before responding. "People always talk." "Yes, but this is different. You've bewitched him somehow. That's the only explanation for why a man of his standing would spend so much time at your pathetic little ranch. Or maybe he sees business potential you're too narrow-minded to recognize." Margaret's smile turned sharp. "Business, is that what we're calling it now? We're partners, legitimate partners. If that bothers you, that's your problem, not mine." "It bothers everyone. You're ruining his reputation." "Then he should protect it by staying away from me." "I've suggested as much. Several of us have tried talking sense into him." Margaret stepped closer, lowering her voice. "But he's obsessed with you. It's unseemly, unnatural. A man like him should be courting someone appropriate, someone refined, Someone who doesn't look like they've been eating for two people. The insult landed exactly where Margaret intended. Clara felt it sink into all the soft, wounded places she tried to keep protected. But she'd had years of practice not showing pain. "Are you finished?" Clara asked calmly. "I'm trying to help you understand your place. My place is running a ranch. Your place is apparently spreading poison for entertainment. We all have our talents." Clara climbed onto her wagon and drove away before Margaret could respond. She made it 3 miles before the shaking started. Not from cold, from fury and hurt, and the terrible weight of being seen as wrong, as inappropriate, as someone who didn't deserve the kindness being offered to her. When she got home, Elias was already there, repairing the water pump. He took one look at her face and set down his tools. "What happened?" "Nothing." "Clara, people are talking about us, about what they think is happening between us. Let them talk." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one being called a witch who's bewitched the wealthy rancher." Elias's jaw tightened. "Who said that? Does it matter? They're all thinking it." Clara climbed down from the wagon, exhaustion hitting her all at once. "They think I've trapped you somehow, that you've lost your mind, that this partnership is either pity or something worse. And what do you think?" The question caught her off guard. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that made her chest tight. I don't know what this is," she admitted. "I think you're either the best man I've ever met, or you're running a con so sophisticated I can't see it yet. Which do you believe?" "I want to believe the first, but I've been burned too many times to trust easily." Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Come with me." "Where?" "Just come." He led her to the eastern pasture, where the 50 cattle grazed peacefully in the winter sun. They stood at the fence line together, watching the herd move and settle, and Clara waited for whatever point Elias was trying to make. "When I first came to Montana, I was nobody," he said finally. "Dirt poor, half-educated, desperate enough to take any work I could find. People looked at me the way they look at you now, like I didn't belong, like I was reaching above my station, like I should accept my place and stop trying for more." Clara listened, not interrupting. "I worked for a rancher named Thomas Garrett for 3 years. He was hard, fair, and completely uninterested in my potential. To him, I was just labor. Then one winter, rustlers hit his herd. Most of his hands ran. I stayed, fought them off, saved half the cattle, nearly got killed in the process." "What happened?" "Thomas started seeing me differently, not as labor, as someone worth investing in. He taught me ranching, helped me buy my first property, and gave me the chance to become something more than a hired hand." Elias turned to face her. "I'm not trying to save you, Clara. I'm trying to do for you what Thomas did for me, recognize someone worth betting on, and give them an actual chance." "Why me?" "Because I watched you stand in that mercantile and take abuse from people who wouldn't last one day doing what you do. Because you've been fighting alone for years, and you're still standing. Because when I look at you, I see someone stronger than half the men I employ." His voice dropped. "And because you deserve someone to believe in you as much as you believe in this ranch." Clara's throat went tight. "People will keep talking. Let them. They'll say terrible things about both of us." "They already do. I don't care. Your reputation, my reputation is built on money and land and fear. None of that matters as much as doing what's right." Elias held her gaze. "You matter more than my reputation. This partnership matters more. And if the people of Red Hollow can't handle that, they can go to hell." The words hung between them like a promise. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that someone actually saw her as more than a burden or a charity case or a fat girl desperate for scraps of kindness. But trust was the hardest thing she'd ever tried to learn. "I need time," she said quietly. "I've got nothing but time. I need to know this is real. That you're not going to wake up one day and realize you made a mistake. I won't. You don't know that." "I do." Elias's voice was certain. "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Clara. Plenty of them. But betting on you isn't one of them." Clara turned away, staring at the cattle, blinking back something that felt dangerously close to tears. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Trust. Hope. Believe that good things can happen to people like me." "Then let me believe it for both of us, until you're ready to believe it yourself." The offer sat between them, impossible and tempting and terrifying. Clara didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. And maybe that was enough for now. The fire started 3 weeks into their partnership. On a night so cold, the stars looked frozen in place. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of cattle screaming. She was out of bed before her mind fully processed what was happening, grabbing her coat and boots, running for the door. The eastern pasture was burning, not the grass, which was buried under snow, but the fence line. Someone had doused the wooden posts in kerosene and lit them like matches. The flames threw orange light across the snow, turning the night into something hellish. The cattle were panicking, pressing against the remaining fence sections, threatening to stampede in any direction that looked like escape. Clara ran toward the fire, her brain already calculating how many posts were burning, how fast the fire was spreading, whether she could contain it before the entire fence line collapsed, and 50 head of cattle scattered across the territory. She didn't see the figure in the shadows until he was already gone, just a dark shape on horseback disappearing into the trees beyond her property line. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this deliberately. Clara grabbed the water buckets from the barn, knowing even as she did that it was useless. The fire was too big, too hot, burning through wood that had been seasoned dry by Montana winter. She threw water anyway, fighting to save what she could, ignoring the heat that singed her eyebrows and turned her cheeks raw. She managed to contain the worst of it to a 30-foot section, but by the time the flames died, a quarter of the eastern fence was destroyed. The cattle had pushed through the damaged section during the chaos. Clara counted heads by moonlight and came up 20 short. 20 head of Elias's cattle, scattered into the frozen wilderness. She was still standing there, covered in soot and ash, when her father emerged from the cabin. "What happened?" James called out, his voice weak from the cold. "Someone burned the fence. Cattle are loose." "How many?" 20, maybe more." James swore, the kind of creative profanity he usually reserved for stuck wagon wheels and broken tools. "You see who did it?" "Someone on horseback. They were gone before I could get close." "This wasn't random." "I know." Clara stared at the smoking remains of the fence posts, rage and fear twisting through her gut. Someone had done this on purpose. Someone who wanted to destroy the partnership with Elias, or destroy the ranch, or destroy Clara herself. She had a pretty good idea who. Dawn found Clara riding toward Elias's ranch, exhausted and furious, and dreading the conversation she was about to have. She'd lost 20 head of his cattle, 20 head that represented his investment in their partnership, his trust in her ability to manage the herd, and his belief that she was worth betting on. She'd failed. The Boone Ranch sprawled across the valley like a small town, all clean buildings and organized corrals and the kind of prosperity Clara had only ever seen from a distance. She'd never actually been here before. Seeing it now, seeing what real success looked like, made the smoking ruins of her own fence feel even more pathetic. Elias was working with several ranch hands in the main corral when Clara rode up. He saw her immediately, read something in her face, and dismissed the workers with a quick gesture. "What happened?" Clara dismounted, her legs shaking from exhaustion and the ride. "Someone burned part of the eastern fence last night. 20 cattle are loose. I tried to track them, but I lost the trail in the dark." Elias's expression didn't change, but something hardened behind his eyes. "Anyone hurt?" "No, just property damage and lost stock." "You see who did it?" "A rider. Gone before I could identify him." Elias was silent for a moment, his jaw working. Then he turned and started shouting orders to his ranch hands. Within minutes, a dozen men were saddling horses, grabbing ropes and supplies, preparing to hunt for the scattered cattle. "You should stay here," Elias said to Clara. "Get some rest." "Those are my cattle too. I'm coming." "I'm coming," she repeated, her voice harder than she intended. "This is my fault, my fence, my watch, my responsibility. It's not your fault someone committed arson. It's my fault I didn't see it coming." Elias studied her face, then nodded. "Mount up." They rode out in 2 groups, splitting up to cover more ground. Clara rode with Elias and 3 of his best trackers, following the trail the scattered cattle had left through the snow. The animals had run hard during the panic, but cattle weren't built for distance. They'd exhausted themselves within a few miles and scattered into smaller groups, seeking shelter from the wind. They found the first group, 6 head, huddled in a grove of pine trees, looking miserable but unharmed. Elias's men herded them together with practiced efficiency while Clara watched, feeling useless. These were professional cattlemen. She was just a woman who'd been pretending she knew what she was doing. The second group took longer to find. They'd wandered into rougher terrain, following a frozen creek bed into rocky country where tracking became harder. Clara rode ahead, reading the snow like her father had taught her, looking for the subtle signs that separated random prints from deliberate trail. She found them in a narrow canyon, 9 head pressed against the far wall, blocked from escaping by the steep terrain. "There!" Clara called back to Elias. Getting the cattle out required careful work. The canyon was too narrow for rough handling, and the animals were already spooked from the fire. Clara dismounted and worked on foot, using her voice and patient movement to coax the cattle toward the opening. It was the kind of work she'd done 1,000 times, the kind of work that didn't require wealth or status or anything except patience and understanding. For the first time that morning, Clara felt like she was actually contributing instead of just cleaning up her own mess. They got all 9 out safely and merged them with the first group. 15 head recovered, 5 still missing. The sun was dropping behind the mountains when they finally found the last group. 5 cattle that had wandered almost 8 miles from Clara's ranch, following some instinct that led them straight into trouble. They'd gotten stuck in a ravine, trapped by snow and steep walls, bawling pitifully into the growing dark. Getting them out required ropes and multiple riders working in coordination. Clara volunteered to go down first, despite the dangerous footing and the very real possibility of falling. She made it to the bottom, secured ropes around the first animal, and signaled for the men above to pull. It took 2 hours to extract all 5 cattle from the ravine. By the time they finished, Clara was soaked in sweat despite the freezing temperature, her hands bleeding from rope burns, her body screaming from exhaustion. But all 50 head were accounted for. They drove the recovered herd back to Clara's ranch in the dark, arriving well past midnight. Elias's men helped secure the cattle in the western pasture, away from the burned fence section, while Clara and Elias surveyed the damage by lantern light. The fence was worse than Clara remembered. A full 40 feet of posts had burned completely through. Repairing it would take days of work and materials Clara couldn't afford. "I'll cover the lumber," Elias said, reading her mind. "You've already invested enough. This wasn't your fault. It happened on my watch. Someone committed a crime on your property. That's different than negligence." Elias turned to face her. "Who do you think did this?" Claire had been asking herself the same question all day. The answer kept circling back to one name. Western Frontier Holdings. Elias's expression darkened. "You sure?" "No, but they're the only ones who benefit from me failing. If I can't make the mortgage payment, the bank seizes the property and sells it cheap. Western Frontier has been buying up every foreclosure in the valley. That's speculation. It's pattern recognition." Clara gestured at the burned fence. "This wasn't random vandalism. Someone wanted to scatter those cattle, wanted to make me look incompetent, wanted to destroy our partnership. They failed. This time. What about next time?" "There won't be a next time," Elias said quietly, "because I'm going to make sure everyone knows that anyone who interferes with this ranch answers to me. That'll just make things worse. They already think I've bewitched you. If you start threatening people on my behalf, I don't care what they think." "I care," Clara said, her voice rising. "I care because I have to live in this territory long after you get bored of playing savior. I care because every time you defend me, it makes me look weaker. I care because I'm trying to build something here that doesn't require Elias Boone's protection to survive." The words came out harsher than she intended, but they'd been building for weeks. Clara was grateful for Elias's help, but she was also terrified of becoming dependent on it, of building a life that would collapse the moment he decided she wasn't worth the investment anymore. Elias was quiet for a long moment. "You think I'm playing?" "I think you're a wealthy man who took an interest in a failing ranch, and wealthy men lose interest when things get complicated. This has been complicated since day one. It's about to get worse. Whoever did this isn't going to stop. They're going to escalate until one of us quits or the ranch fails completely. Then we don't quit. You say that now, I'll say it tomorrow too, and next week, and next month." Elias stepped closer, his voice steady. "I told you before, I don't quit on people worth betting on, and you're worth every bit of trouble this brings." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that his conviction would last longer than the novelty. But trust was a luxury she'd never been able to afford. "I need to repair this fence," she said instead, turning away, "before the cattle break through again." Elias didn't push, just nodded and went to organize his men. They worked through the night and into the next day, replacing the burned posts with new lumber from Elias's seemingly endless supply. Clara worked alongside the ranch hands, ignoring their curious glances, proving she could keep pace with men who did this for a living. By the second afternoon, the fence was functional again. Not pretty, but strong enough to hold. Elias's men rode back to the main ranch while Clara and Elias did a final inspection of the repair work. The sun was setting again, painting everything gold and purple, and Clara felt exhaustion dragging at her bones. "You should eat something," Elias said. "You haven't stopped moving in 30 hours. "I'll eat when I'm done." "You're done now." Clara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She was done. The fence was repaired, the cattle were secured, and pushing herself further would just be stubbornness. They walked back to the cabin together. Clara expected Elias to leave, but he followed her inside instead. Her father was asleep in his bed, breathing easier than he had in months. The cabin smelled like coffee and wood smoke, and the kind of poverty that clung to everything, no matter how hard you scrubbed. Clara poured coffee from the pot she'd made that morning, now thick and bitter. She offered a cup to Elias, who took it without complaint. They sat at the kitchen table, not speaking, just existing in the same tired space. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "Why are you really doing this?" "I told you." "No. The real reason. Not the story about Thomas Garrett or recognizing potential or doing what's right. The real reason you're spending all your time and money on a ranch that's been failing for years." Elias was quiet for so long, Clara thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was different, rougher, more honest. "Because I'm tired of being alone." The admission hung in the air between them. "You own half the territory," Clara said. "You could have anyone you wanted. I could have anyone willing to marry money. That's not the same as being wanted." "That's ridiculous. Clara gestured vaguely. "You're successful, powerful, respected." "Feared," Elias corrected. "There's a difference. People respect my money. They fear my influence. Nobody knows me. Nobody wants to." "I don't believe that." "It's true. I spent 20 years building an empire, and somewhere along the way I forgot to build a life. Now I'm 43 years old, rich as hell, and lonely as a stone." He looked at her directly. "Then I walked into that mercantile and saw someone who understood what it meant to fight alone. Someone who kept going even when the whole world was against her. And I thought, maybe I don't have to be alone anymore." Clara's chest went tight. "You barely know me. I know enough. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I know you'd rather die than surrender. I know you're terrified of trusting people because everyone you've trusted has let you down." Elias paused. "And I know you see yourself as something broken that nobody could want, which is the biggest lie you've ever believed." "It's not a lie. Look at me. I'm fat, poor, and difficult. That's not exactly what men dream about. Then men are idiots. Because when I look at you, I see someone extraordinary trying to convince herself she's ordinary. I see someone who survived things that would have broken most people. I see someone worth knowing, worth trusting, worth—" He stopped himself. "Worth what?" Elias met her eyes. "Worth fighting for." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor, needing distance from the intensity in his voice. "You don't mean that." "I do." "You're confusing gratitude with something else, or curiosity, or—" "Clara." Elias stood too, but didn't move closer. "I'm 43 years old. I know the difference between curiosity and connection. I know what I'm feeling." "And what are you feeling?" The question came out as a challenge, daring him to say it out loud. Elias didn't flinch. "Like I've been waiting my whole life to meet someone who sees the world the way you do. Like maybe all the loneliness and fighting and building something from nothing was leading to this moment. Like I finally found someone who understands what it costs to survive." Clara's hands were shaking. "That's not love. That's recognition. You see yourself in me and you're calling it connection. Maybe it started that way, but it's become something more." "You barely know me," Clara repeated, but her voice was weaker now. "I know you take care of your dying father even though it's killing you. I know you fight for this ranch like it's the last piece of solid ground in the world. I know you'd rather work yourself to death than accept help because you've been taught that needing people makes you weak. Elias's voice softened. I know you're terrified right now because someone's finally seen you as more than a burden. And I know you want to run because running has always been safer than staying. Stop. Why? Because you're making this complicated. It's already complicated. I'm just being honest about it. Clara turned away, staring out the window at the snow-covered valley. Her reflection looked back at her, exhausted, ash-stained. Everything she'd always been told wasn't enough. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. Do what? Trust that you won't change your mind, that you won't wake up one day and realize I'm not worth the trouble. That's not going to happen. You don't know that. People change. Feelings change. What happens when you get tired of defending me to your friends? When the gossip gets too vicious? When being associated with me starts costing you business? Then I'll pay the cost. You say that now, I'll say it forever if that's what it takes for you to believe me. Elias moved closer, stopping just behind her. I'm not going anywhere, Clara. Not unless you tell me to leave. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words settle into the spaces where doubt had lived for years. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that someone could see all her broken pieces and still think she was worth keeping. But wanting and believing were different countries, separated by an ocean of hurt. I can't promise you anything, she said finally. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for a chance. What if I fail you? Then we'll fail together and figure out what comes next. Clara turned to face him. Elias was standing close enough that she could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair, the exhaustion that matched her own. He looked like someone who'd been fighting just as long as she had, who understood exactly what survival cost. This is insane, she whispered. Probably. We barely know each other. We know enough. People will talk. Let them. Clara searched his face for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that this was temporary madness that would burn out like the fence posts. She found nothing but steady certainty and something that looked dangerously close to hope. One condition, she said. Name it. You treat me like a partner, not a project, not someone you're saving. An equal partner who makes decisions and takes risks and fails sometimes without you trying to fix everything. Done. I'm serious. If this is going to work, whatever this is, I need to know you respect me enough to let me fail. I respect you more than anyone I've ever met, Elias said quietly, and I promise to let you fail spectacularly whenever you want. Despite everything, Clara almost smiled. You're ridiculous. I've been called worse. By me, probably. Definitely by you. They stood in the kitchen, close enough to touch but not touching, and something shifted between them. Not resolution, exactly, but possibility. The kind of possibility Clara had stopped believing in years ago. I should get back to the main ranch, Elias said finally, unless you need help with anything else. I think I've had enough help for one day. Fair enough. He moved toward the door, then paused. Clara? Yeah? Thank you for letting me stay, for letting me try. You haven't tried anything yet. Yes, I have. I've been trying since the moment I walked into that mercantile. He left before Clara could respond, disappearing into the twilight on horseback. Clara stood alone in her cabin, listening to her father's breathing and the distant sound of cattle settling for the night, and felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Hope. The next morning brought visitors Clara didn't want. Two men rode up to the ranch just after dawn, both wearing expensive suits that looked out of place in the Montana wilderness. The older one introduced himself as Harold Pemberton, representative of Western Frontier Holdings. The younger one didn't introduce himself at all, just stood behind Pemberton like hired muscle. Clara met them outside, rifle in hand. Not pointed at them, just present. Miss Whitmore, Pemberton said, all false warmth. I heard about your recent troubles. That fire must have been terrifying. It was inconvenient, I'm sure, and expensive to repair. Pemberton glanced at the new fence posts. That's quality lumber. Must have cost a fortune. I manage. Of course. Though I notice you've had help lately. Mr. Boone's been spending quite a bit of time here. Clara's grip tightened on the rifle. If you have a point, make it. Pemberton's smile didn't waver. Western Frontier Holdings is prepared to make you an offer for this property. A generous offer, considering its current condition. The ranch isn't for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price, and we're prepared to offer well above market value. Enough to pay off your debts, relocate you and your father somewhere more comfortable, and still leave you with money in your pocket. Not interested. Miss Whitmore, please be reasonable. This ranch is failing. You're 3 months behind on mortgage payments. The bank will foreclose in a matter of weeks. Selling to us now means you walk away with something instead of nothing. I'll make the payment. With what? Cattle that aren't yours? Pemberton's voice sharpened. We know about your arrangement with Boone. Running his stock on your land doesn't make you a successful rancher. It makes you dependent on his charity. It makes me a partner in a profitable venture. It makes you a burden he'll eventually tire of carrying. Pemberton pulled an envelope from his coat. This is our offer. It's good for 72 hours. After that, we withdraw it and wait for the bank to seize the property anyway. Clara didn't take the envelope. Get off my land. Miss Whitmore, I said get off my land before I decide this rifle isn't just decorative. The younger man's hand moved toward his coat, but Pemberton stopped him with a gesture. That would be unwise, Miss Whitmore. Threatening representatives of a legitimate business could have legal consequences. So could arson, Clara said flatly. Funny how someone burned my fence the same week you show up offering to buy the property. Pemberton's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. That's a serious accusation. It's an observation. And here's another one. If anything else happens to this ranch, anything at all, I'm going straight to the territorial marshal with every detail about Western Frontier's business practices in this valley. We've done nothing illegal. Then you won't mind an investigation. Pemberton stared at her for a long moment, reassessing. Then he smiled again, colder this time. You're making a mistake, Miss Whitmore. We're offering you a way out. When you realize how badly you need it, the offer will be gone. I'll survive the disappointment. The two men mounted their horses and rode away, leaving the envelope on the ground where Pemberton had dropped it. Clara watched until they disappeared over the ridge, then picked up the envelope. Inside was a contract offering $350 for her property, barely enough to cover the mortgage and nothing more. They weren't trying to help her. They were trying to steal the ranch legally. She burned the contract in the kitchen stove and tried not to think about how close she'd come to accepting it. That afternoon, Elias returned with lumber to repair the last section of damaged fence. He found Clara in the barn, inventorying their dwindling supply of winter feed. Had visitors this morning, she said without preamble. Elias set down the lumber. Western Frontier? How did you know? Because I had visitors too. They made me an offer to buy out my share of our partnership. Clara's stomach dropped. What did you say? I told them to go to hell. Then I asked some questions around Red Hollow about their business practices. Elias leaned against a support beam. They're worse than we thought. They've been systematically targeting struggling ranches across the territory, offering lowball prices, and when people refuse, mysterious accidents start happening. Fires, poisoned water, missing livestock. We need to report this. To who? The territorial marshal is 3 days ride away and up to his neck in real crime. Local law enforcement is a part-time sheriff who's probably on Western Frontier's payroll. Elias's voice was grim. We're on our own. Then we need to be ready for the next attack, or we end this before there is a next attack. Clara looked up sharply. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we gather evidence, talk to other ranchers they've targeted, build a case that even a corrupt sheriff can't ignore. And we make it very clear that coming after you means coming after me. That's exactly what I didn't want. You using your influence to fight my battles. This isn't fighting your battle. This is fighting our battle. They came after our partnership. That makes it both our problems. Clara wanted to argue, but he was right. Western Frontier wasn't just targeting her anymore. They were targeting the partnership itself, trying to break it apart before it could succeed. If we do this, we do it smart, she said. No threats, no intimidation, just evidence and witnesses. Agreed. And if it doesn't work? Elias's expression was flat. Then we find another way. They spent the next week talking to other ranchers who'd been approached by Western Frontier Holdings. The stories were horrifyingly consistent: pressure, sabotage, and eventual foreclosure. Most people were too scared to speak publicly. A few agreed to provide written statements if Clara and Elias could guarantee protection. It wasn't much, but it was something. Clara was compiling the statements into a formal complaint when her father called out from his bedroom. She found him sitting up, looking better than he had in months, holding an old ledger she recognized from his blacksmithing days. "I've been thinking," James said. "That's dangerous." "Quiet. I've been thinking about your mother's family back east." Clara frowned. "What about them?" "They had money. Not a lot, but enough. When she married me, they cut her off for choosing a blacksmith over a banker. But she had a trust fund, small one, set up by her grandmother before she died." "Pa, Mama spent that money years ago." "She didn't. She told me she did, but I found the documents. She never touched it. Just let it sit there, accumulating interest in case we ever needed it desperately." Clara's heart started pounding. "How much?" "According to these statements, about $400. $400. More than enough to make the mortgage payment. More than enough to buy supplies for spring. More than enough to keep the ranch alive long enough for the cattle sale to save them completely." "Why didn't you tell me?" Clara whispered. "I only found the papers last week when I was going through old documents. Your mother hid them where she knew I wouldn't look, in her recipe book." James's eyes were wet. "She was saving it for you, for when you really needed it, and I think that time is now." Clara took the ledger with shaking hands. Looking at her mother's careful handwriting documenting an account Clara never knew existed. Her mother had died believing Clara would be fine, that her daughter was strong enough to survive anything. But she'd still left insurance, just in case. "This changes everything," Clara said. "It gives you options. You can pay the mortgage, tell Western Frontier to go to hell properly, maybe even expand the ranch next season." Clara's mind was already racing through possibilities. With this money, she wasn't dependent on the cattle sale succeeding. She could breathe, plan, build something sustainable instead of just surviving day to day. "I need to tell Elias," she said. "Tell him tomorrow. Tonight, just sit with this. Let yourself feel safe for once." Clara sat beside her father's bed, holding the ledger that represented her mother's final gift, and let herself imagine a future that didn't involve constant desperation. It felt dangerous. It felt possible. It felt like the first real chance she'd had in years. Clara didn't tell Elias about the trust fund the next day, or the day after that. She kept the knowledge close, turning it over in her mind like a stone she was testing for cracks. The money changed everything and nothing at the same time. It meant she could survive, but it didn't tell her whether she wanted to survive alone or with a partner whose presence in her life still felt too good to trust completely. She was still wrestling with the decision when the second disaster hit. It came in the form of a letter delivered by a nervous clerk from the Red Hollow Bank. Clara read it standing in her doorway, her coffee going cold in her hand, while the clerk fidgeted with his hat like he was expecting her to shoot the messenger. The bank was calling in her loan. Immediately. Not in 8 weeks like the original agreement stated. Now. Within 10 days, or they'd begin foreclosure proceedings. "This isn't legal," Clara said, reading the letter again. "I have until March to make payment." "There's a clause," the clerk said miserably. "Section 7, subsection 3. If the bank determines the property is at high risk of default, they can accelerate the payment schedule." "High risk? I've been making payments for 6 years." "You've been late for 6 years, and you missed the last 2 entirely. The board reviewed your account and determined the risk was unacceptable." Clara wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. She had missed the last 2 payments. She was behind, and banks didn't care about intention or effort or the fact that she'd been nursing a dying father through a brutal winter while trying to save a ranch that had been failing since before she was old enough to understand what failure meant. 10 days, she repeated. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore, I really am." The clerk left before Clara could decide whether to scream at him or just slam the door. She did neither. Just stood there holding the letter, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. Someone at the bank had pushed this through, someone who wanted her to fail before she could succeed. And Clara had a pretty good idea who'd paid them to do it. She rode to Elias's ranch without planning to, her body moving on autopilot while her mind spun through calculations that refused to add up. The trust fund would cover the payment. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that someone was actively working to destroy her, and money wouldn't stop them from trying again. Elias was in his office, a building separate from the main house that smelled like leather and wood smoke, and the kind of prosperity Clara had never experienced. He looked up when she entered, took one look at her face, and set down the paperwork he'd been reviewing. What happened? Clara handed him the letter. Elias read it twice, his expression darkening with each pass. This is Western Frontier. Obviously. They bribed someone at the bank to accelerate your loan, probably offered to buy the debt after foreclosure. Can they do that? They can do anything if they throw enough money at it. Elias stood, pacing to the window. This is aggressive, more aggressive than their usual tactics. Which means they're desperate, or confident. They think they've already won. Clara sat in the chair across from his desk, exhaustion catching up with her all at once. I can make the payment. Elias turned sharply. What? My mother had a trust fund. My father just found the documents. It's enough to cover the loan and then some. That's incredible. Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed to think about what it meant. It means you're safe. It means Western Frontier loses. It means I can survive without the partnership, Clara said quietly. I can pay off the loan, keep the ranch running on my own, and you can take your cattle back to your own land. We can end this before it gets worse. The silence that followed felt like ice cracking. Elias crossed the room and sat on the edge of his desk, looking at her directly. Is that what you want? I want to stop being a target. I want to stop dragging you into battles that aren't yours. I want... Clara's voice cracked. I want to stop being terrified that everything I'm building is going to collapse the moment I start believing in it. So you're going to run. I'm going to survive. There's a difference. Not the way you're describing it. Elias's voice was gentle but firm. You're talking about going back to fighting alone because you're scared of what happens if you keep fighting with someone. I'm scared of what happens when that someone leaves. When you realize this partnership costs more than it's worth. When defending me damages your reputation beyond repair. My reputation is already damaged. People think I've lost my mind over a woman who doesn't meet their standards. And you know what? I don't care. Because their standards are broken. Clara stood abruptly, needing movement. You say that now. I've been saying it for weeks. How many times do I have to prove I'm not going anywhere before you believe me? I don't know. Maybe forever. Maybe there's no amount of proof that'll convince me I'm worth staying for. The admission came out raw and honest, exposing the wound Clara had been trying to hide since the day Elias walked into that mercantile. Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, rougher, more vulnerable. When I was 25, I fell in love with a woman named Catherine Moreland. She was beautiful, educated, everything I thought I wanted. I courted her for 2 years, worked myself half to death building something I thought she'd be proud of. When I finally proposed, she said yes. Clara hadn't known this story, hadn't known there was a story to know. 3 months before the wedding, she left. Ran off with a banker from Helena who could offer her the kind of life she actually wanted, society parties, culture, distance from the frontier. She left a note saying she'd tried to love me, but she couldn't marry someone so common. Elias's jaw tightened. She apologized for wasting my time. Elias, I spent 10 years after that convinced I wasn't enough. Not refined enough, not educated enough, not worth loving for anything except the money I could provide. I built my empire thinking that if I became successful enough, wealthy enough, powerful enough, someone would eventually see me as more than just a rough cowboy who got lucky. That's not... Let me finish. Elias met her eyes. I was wrong. Success didn't make people see me differently. It just made them see my money, and I was lonely as hell, surrounded by people who wanted what I had, but not who I was. Then I met you. Clara's throat went tight. You didn't care about my money, didn't want my influence. You looked at me like I was just a man who showed up uninvited and kept showing up despite being told to leave. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt like someone was seeing me instead of my bank account. I don't understand what you're saying. I'm saying you think I'm going to leave when things get hard, but hard is the only time I feel alive. I'm saying you think I'll get bored of defending you, but defending you is the first thing I've done in years that actually matters. I'm saying you're so convinced you're not worth staying for that you can't see I've already stayed. I'm already here, and I'm not leaving unless you tell me to. Clara turned away, blinking back tears she refused to shed. Why? Because you're the strongest person I've ever met. Because you fight like the world depends on it. Because when you look at me, you see someone who has to earn your respect instead of someone who already owns it. And because, He stopped. Because what? Because I'm in love with you. The words landed like a physical blow. Clara actually staggered, gripping the edge of the desk to steady herself. No, you're not. Yes, I am. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you take care of your dying father without complaint. I know you'd work yourself to death before accepting charity. I know you're terrified of trusting people because everyone you've trusted has hurt you. And I know you're about to run because someone finally sees you as more than a burden, and that scares you worse than poverty ever could. Stop. Why? Because you're making this impossible. Good. Because easy things aren't worth having. Clara spun to face him, anger and fear and something dangerously close to hope warring in her chest. You don't love me. You love the idea of me. You love fixing broken things. You love being the hero who saves the woman nobody wanted. That's not true. Prove it. How? Tell me one thing about me that has nothing to do with my strength or my work ethic or my ability to survive. Tell me one thing you love that isn't about what I can do or how hard I fight. Elias was quiet for a beat. Then, the way you talk to your horses, like they're people who deserve explanation instead of commands. The way you look at the mountains when you think nobody's watching, like you're memorizing them in case they disappear. The fact that you make terrible coffee, but drink it anyway because wasting it would be worse than suffering through it. His voice softened. The way you smiled when the first calf was born last week, just for a second, when you thought I wasn't looking, like you were letting yourself feel joy, and it surprised you. Clara's breath caught. I love that you're stubborn and difficult and completely unwilling to make things easy for anyone, including yourself. I love that you'd rather fail honestly than succeed through compromise. I love that you've been hurt so many times, but you still keep hoping, even when you pretend you don't. Elias stepped closer. And I love that you're standing here right now, ready to run, but you haven't left yet, because some part of you wants to stay. That doesn't mean I should. No, but it means you could, if you wanted to. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw someone who'd been just as lonely, just as hurt, just as convinced he wasn't worth loving as she was. Two people who'd built walls so high they'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. I can't promise you anything, she whispered. I'm not asking for promises. I'm going to fail you. I'm going to mess this up. I'm going to say the wrong thing or push you away, or then we'll figure it out. Together. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's terrifying. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you. Clara stood there, teetering on the edge of something that felt like falling, and made a decision that would either save her or destroy her completely. If we do this, if I stay, you have to promise me something. Anything. Don't try to protect me from everything. Don't fight all my battles. Let me fail sometimes. Let me be imperfect and difficult, and I promise to let you be exactly who you are. Imperfect, difficult, and more stubborn than anyone I've ever met. Elias smiled slightly. Is that acceptable? It'll have to be. They stood in his office, close enough to touch but not touching, and Clara felt something shift inside her chest. Not resolution, not certainty, just the willingness to try. I should pay the bank, she said finally, before they start foreclosure. We'll pay the bank, together, as partners. I have the money, Otto. I know, but partnerships mean sharing the burden. Let me help. Clara wanted to argue, but the exhaustion of fighting alone for so long finally caught up with her. All right, together. They rode to Red Hollow the next day. Clara with the trust fund documents, and Elias with the kind of quiet authority that made bank managers nervous. The meeting was brief and uncomfortable. The bank president, a sweating man named Morrison, who kept glancing at Elias like he might be dangerous, tried to backtrack on the accelerated loan. Perhaps we were too hasty in our assessment. You were bribed, Elias said flatly, by Western Frontier Holdings, to force Miss Whitmore into foreclosure so they could buy her land cheap. Morrison's face went red. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. And here's what's going to happen. You're going to accept Miss Whitmore's payment in full. You're going to restore her original payment schedule for any future obligations. And you're going to provide a written statement documenting Western Frontier's attempted interference in your business practices. I can't. You can. or I'll move all my business to the bank in Helena, and I'll make sure every rancher in this territory knows why. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Morrison looked between Clara and Elias, calculating risks and finding none he could afford. Fine, I'll prepare the documents. Clara handed over the payment, $400 in carefully counted bills that represented her mother's final gift and her own last chance. Morrison counted them twice, recorded the payment, and provided a receipt that Clara folded into her pocket like armor. You're current on all obligations, Morrison said stiffly. The foreclosure proceedings are canceled. And the statement? Elias prompted. Morrison's jaw worked. I'll have it ready by tomorrow. They left the bank with Clara's ranch secured and Morrison's cooperation guaranteed. But the victory felt hollow. Clara had won this battle, but the war was far from over. They're not going to stop, she said as they walked back to their horses. I know. What do we do? Elias was quiet for a moment, thinking. We go on offense, stop reacting to their attacks, and start making some of our own. How? We prove they've been sabotaging ranches across the territory. We get enough evidence to force a territorial investigation, and we make it clear that anyone who works with Western Frontier is working against every honest rancher in Montana. Clara climbed onto her horse, feeling something that might have been hope. That's ambitious. So is everything we've done so far. They rode back to Clara's ranch in companionable silence, the kind of quiet that came from working beside someone long enough to not need constant conversation. The sun was setting by the time they arrived, painting the valley in shades of gold and purple. Clara's father was sitting on the porch, wrapped in blankets, looking stronger than he had in months. You paid the bank, he called out. We did, Clara said, dismounting. And they accepted it without trouble? Elias convinced them it was in their best interest. James looked at Elias with something like respect. You're a good man, Boone. I try. Don't let my daughter push you away. She's stubborn as a mule and twice as difficult, but she's worth the trouble. Pa, Clara protested. I'm dying. I can say what I want. James stood, steadier than Clara expected. I'm going inside. You two figure out whatever you're dancing around before I have to die without seeing my daughter happy. He disappeared into the cabin, leaving Clara and Elias alone in the twilight. Your father's direct, Elias observed. He's dying. He doesn't have time for subtlety. Is he right? Are we dancing around something? Clara looked at him. This man who'd shown up uninvited and kept showing up despite every reason to leave. This man who'd defended her publicly, worked beside her constantly, and claimed to love her despite knowing exactly how difficult she could be. Maybe, she admitted. What are we going to do about it? I don't know. I've never been good at this. At what? Trusting someone enough to let them stay. Elias stepped closer, his voice gentle. Then start small. Trust me for today. See how it feels. Tomorrow you can decide whether to trust me again. And if I can't, then I'll wait, however long it takes. Clara studied his face in the fading light and made a decision that terrified her more than facing down Western Frontier ever could. Stay for dinner. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a promise of forever. But it was permission to be present, to exist in the same space without walls or distance, or the constant fear that proximity meant vulnerability. Elias smiled, not the polite smile he used in business, but something genuine and warm. I'd like that. They ate dinner in Clara's cramped kitchen, the three of them crowded around a table built for two. James told stories from his blacksmithing days, making them laugh with tales of difficult customers and impossible repair jobs. Clara made stew from the last of their winter vegetables, and Elias complimented it like it was the finest meal he'd ever eaten, which was an obvious lie but a kind one. For a few hours, Clara let herself pretend this was normal, that having Elias in her kitchen was routine instead of extraordinary, that she deserved this kind of comfort instead of constantly fighting to justify her existence. It felt dangerous. It felt right. After dinner, Elias helped Clara clean while James dozed in his chair. They worked in silence, washing and drying dishes in a rhythm that felt practiced despite being new. This is nice, Elias said quietly. Washing dishes? Being here. With you. Doing normal things instead of fighting for survival. Clara set down the plate she was drying. What happens when the fighting's over? When we've beaten Western Frontier and saved the ranch and there's no crisis to focus on, what happens when it's just us, being normal? Then we figure out what normal looks like, together. You make it sound easy. It won't be easy, but I think it'll be worth it. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that they could build something sustainable instead of just surviving disaster after disaster. But hope was still the hardest thing she'd ever tried to learn. I need time, she said finally. I know. Take all the time you need. What if I never get there? What if I can't learn to trust this? Elias set down his own dish and turned to face her fully. Then I'll love you anyway. Imperfectly, incompletely, whatever you can give me. Because being with you, even complicated and difficult, is better than being without you. The honesty of it hit Clara like a wave. She'd spent her whole life being told she wasn't enough. And here was someone saying she was enough exactly as she was. Broken pieces and all. You're going to regret this, she whispered. Never. I'm going to make you miserable. Probably, but I'll be miserable and happy at the same time. Clara found herself almost smiling. That doesn't make sense. Neither does loving someone as stubborn as you. But here we are. They stood in her kitchen, surrounded by clean dishes and the smell of wood smoke, and Clara let herself imagine a future where this was normal, where having someone who stayed wasn't extraordinary, where being loved wasn't something she had to earn through constant proving. It was the most terrifying thing she'd ever done. But maybe, just maybe, it was also the bravest. The next week brought a different kind of disaster, the kind that couldn't be fought with rifles or fence posts or even legal documents. A massive blizzard rolled in from the north, bigger and meaner than anything Montana had seen in a decade. The temperature dropped to 40 below zero. Wind screamed across the valley, turning snow into horizontal knives. Visibility dropped to nothing. Clara and Elias spent the first day battling to keep the cattle alive, breaking ice every few hours, hauling feed through conditions that made breathing painful. They worked until exhaustion became dangerous, then retreated to the cabin to thaw out before starting again. By the second day, Clara's fingers were so cold she could barely grip anything. Her face was raw from windburn. Her body screamed for rest that she couldn't afford to take. Elias looked worse. He'd been working both ranches, riding between Clara's property and his own, trying to keep two operations alive through impossible conditions. Clara found him in the barn on the third day, sitting in a pile of hay, too exhausted to stand. You need to rest, she said. Can't. Cattle still need feeding. The cattle can wait 2 hours. You can't. Clara pulled him to his feet, ignoring his protests. Come inside. Warm up. Sleep. I should go back to my ranch. You'll die on the way. The storm's too strong. Elias didn't argue further. He was too tired. Clara got him inside, sat him by the fire, and made coffee strong enough to strip paint. James had already retreated to bed, worn out from the strain of the storm. The cabin was quiet except for wind hammering the walls and the crackle of wood burning. Thank you, Elias said quietly. For what? For taking care of me. Nobody's done that in a long time. Clara sat beside him, close enough to feel his warmth. You've been taking care of me for weeks. Seemed fair to return the favor. That's different. How? Because I chose that. Nobody asked you to. I chose this too, Clara interrupted. I chose to let you stay. I chose to accept your partnership. And I'm choosing right now to make sure you don't kill yourself trying to save my ranch and yours at the same time. Elias looked at her with something unreadable in his eyes. I'm not used to being chosen. Neither am I. Guess we're figuring it out together. They sat in the firelight, drinking terrible coffee and listening to the storm rage outside. Clara felt Elias lean against her shoulder, his exhaustion finally catching up with him. She didn't move, just sat there, being a solid presence for someone who'd spent months being one for her. Clara? Yeah? I meant what I said, about loving you. I know. Do you believe me? Clara was quiet for a long moment, testing the truth before speaking it out loud. I'm starting to. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a promise of forever. But it was progress. Slow, difficult, terrifying progress toward trusting that someone could see all her broken pieces and still choose to stay. Elias fell asleep against her shoulder, too exhausted to fight it. Clara sat in the quiet cabin, listening to his breathing sync with the wind and let herself feel something she'd been afraid to name. Safe. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara Whitmore felt safe. The feeling wouldn't last. She knew that. Tomorrow would bring more storms, more battles with Western Frontier, more reasons to be afraid. But right now, in this moment, with someone who'd chosen her sleeping against her shoulder, Clara let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this. And maybe that was enough. The storm broke on the fourth day, leaving the valley buried under snow, and a silence so complete it felt unnatural. Clara stepped outside to assess the damage and found a world transformed. Drifts higher than her head, fence posts completely buried, and a cold so sharp it hurt to breathe. But the cattle had survived. All 50 head, sheltered in the western pasture where she and Elias had moved them before the worst hit. Clara counted them twice, hardly believing their luck, then turned to find Elias standing behind her, looking as exhausted and relieved as she felt. "We did it," he said. "Barely." "Barely counts." They spent the morning digging out the ranch, clearing paths to the barn, breaking through ice that had formed over water troughs, checking each animal for frostbite or injury. The work was brutal and necessary, and Clara threw herself into it with the kind of focus that kept her from thinking about how close they'd come to losing everything. She was clearing snow from the cabin steps when a rider appeared on the ridge. Clara's hand moved instinctively to the rifle she kept near the door, but she recognized the horse before the rider got close. Cooper, one of Elias's ranch hands, rode down looking grim. "Boss," he called out, "we got trouble at the main ranch." Elias emerged from the barn. "What kind of trouble?" "Western Frontier. They hit us during the storm, poisoned the water supply in the south pasture, lost 12 head before we figured out what was happening." The news hit like a physical blow. Clara saw Elias's expression go flat and cold, the kind of anger that didn't need volume to be terrifying. "How many men do we have available?" Elias asked. 8, including me. The rest are still digging out from the storm." "Get them armed and mounted. We're riding to Red Hollow." "Boss, Now, Cooper." The ranch hand rode off without further argument. Elias turned to Clara, and she saw something dangerous in his eyes, the kind of determination that came from being pushed too far for too long. "I'm going with you," Clara said before he could speak. "This could get ugly." "Good. I'm tired of pretty." They rode to Red Hollow with 8 of Elias's ranch hands, all armed, all looking like they'd been waiting for permission to stop being polite. The town came into view around noon. Neat buildings, clean streets, the kind of prosperity built on other people's suffering. Elias led them straight to the offices of Western Frontier Holdings, a new building on the edge of town that stood out like a sore thumb among the older structures. They dismounted as one, boots hitting frozen ground in unison, and Clara felt something shift in the air. This wasn't a business visit. This was a reckoning. Harold Pemberton emerged before they reached the door, flanked by the same silent man who'd accompanied him to Clara's ranch. He took one look at the armed riders, and his professional smile faltered. "Mr. Boone, Miss Whitmore, what brings you to—" "You poisoned my water supply," Elias said flatly. "Killed 12 head of my cattle, during a blizzard that could have killed my ranch hands if they'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. I have no idea what you're talking about. You burned Miss Whitmore's fence. You bribed the bank president to accelerate her loan, and now you've escalated to outright sabotage that could have resulted in human casualties." Elias stepped closer, his voice dropping to something deadly. "You're done." Pemberton's false warmth evaporated. "You have no proof of any of this. We have Morrison's written statement documenting your bribery. We have testimony from 6 other ranchers you've targeted. We have evidence of arson, sabotage, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Elias pulled a folded document from his coat. "And as of this morning, we have a formal complaint filed with the Territorial Marshal's office." For the first time, Pemberton looked genuinely worried. "You can't prove any of that will hold up in court. Maybe not, but I can prove it in the court of public opinion." Elias raised his voice so the gathering crowd of townspeople could hear. "Everyone in Red Hollow is going to know that Western Frontier Holdings builds its fortune by destroying honest ranchers. Every business owner, every merchant, every family that depends on this valley's ranching economy is going to know you're a threat to their livelihood. You're making a mistake, Boone." "No. You made the mistake. You thought you could intimidate and sabotage your way to success. You thought nobody would fight back because you had money and influence and a willingness to hurt people. Elias's voice was ice. You were wrong. Pemberton's hand moved toward his coat, but Cooper and two other ranch hands stepped forward, hands on their rifles. The silent man beside Pemberton tensed but didn't move. The math was simple. They were outnumbered and outgunned. This isn't over, Pemberton said. Yes, it is, Clara spoke up, her voice carrying across the street. Because every rancher in this territory now knows what you are. Every bank, every merchant, every person you need to do business with knows your poison. You can threaten us all you want, but you can't operate in a territory where nobody will work with you. You think you've won? You've just made yourself targets. We've been targets since the moment we refused to surrender, Clara said. The difference is, we're done being afraid of you. The crowd that had gathered was murmuring now, the kind of low conversation that spread through towns like wildfire. Clara could see the calculation happening on faces. Merchants reconsidering their relationships with Western Frontier. Ranchers realizing they weren't alone in being targeted. Townspeople understanding that the prosperity they'd enjoyed came at the cost of their neighbors' suffering. Pemberton saw it too. Saw his carefully constructed operation collapsing in real time. You'll regret this, he said, but the threat was hollow now. Probably, Elias agreed, but at least I'll regret it honestly. They left Pemberton standing in front of his office, surrounded by a town that was starting to turn against him. It wasn't a complete victory. Western Frontier still had money and connections and the kind of ruthlessness that didn't disappear overnight. But it was enough. Enough to shift the balance. Enough to give other ranchers the courage to speak up. Enough to prove that fighting back was possible. Clara and Elias rode back to her ranch in silence, the adrenaline slowly fading into exhaustion. The sun was setting by the time they arrived, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of fire. You think it's really over? Clara asked. The worst of it, maybe. They'll still cause trouble, but they can't operate in the open anymore. Too many people watching now. So we won. We survived. There's a difference. Clara dismounted, her body aching from days of constant work and stress. I'll take survival. It's better than the alternative. They walked to the cabin together, moving with the kind of synchronization that came from working beside someone through hell. Clara's father was waiting on the porch, wrapped in blankets, looking frailer than he had in weeks. You two look like death warmed over, James observed. Feel like it too, Clara admitted. Did you finish it? We started finishing it, Elias said. The rest will take time. James nodded, satisfied. Come inside. I made stew. It's terrible, but it's hot. They ate in the cramped kitchen, too tired for conversation, just existing in the same warm space. Clara found herself watching Elias across the table, this man who'd shown up uninvited and kept showing up, who'd fought beside her and defended her and claimed to love her despite every reason to walk away. She still didn't fully trust it, still waited for the moment when he'd realized she was more trouble than she was worth, but she was starting to believe it might not come. After dinner, James excused himself to bed, leaving Clara and Elias alone by the fire. I should go, Elias said, but he didn't move. You could stay. People will talk. People already talk. Let them. Elias smiled slightly. You're getting bold. I'm getting tired of caring what people think. They sat in companionable silence, watching the fire burn low, and Clara felt something loosen in her chest. The battle with Western Frontier wasn't completely over, but the worst of the danger had passed. The ranch was saved. Her father was healing. The cattle were alive. For the first time in years, Clara could breathe without feeling like she was drowning. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now we rebuild. Repair what's broken. Plan for spring. Figure out what normal looks like when we're not fighting for survival. I don't know how to do normal. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. Clara turned to look at him. You keep saying that. Together. Like it's simple. It's not simple, but it's true. What if I can't be what you need me to be? Then you'll be what you are, and that'll be enough. The certainty in his voice made Clara's throat tight. She'd spent her whole life being told she wasn't enough. Not thin enough, not pretty enough, not refined enough to matter. And here was someone saying the opposite, over and over, until she was starting to believe it might actually be true. I'm not good at this, she whispered. At what? Letting someone stay. trusting that you won't leave when things get complicated. Things are already complicated. I'm still here. For now. For as long as you'll have me. Elias reached out, taking her hand. His grip was warm and calloused and steady. I know you're scared. I know you've been hurt. But I'm not going anywhere, Clara. Not tomorrow, not next month. Not when things get hard or when you push me away or when the whole territory is gossiping about us. You can't promise that. I can. And I am. Clara looked down at their joined hands, hers rough from work, his equally weathered, and made a decision that terrified her more than facing down Western Frontier ever could. Then stay. Tonight. Tomorrow. However long this lasts. It's going to last, Elias said quietly, because I've never been more certain of anything in my life. They sat by the dying fire, hands clasped, and Clara let herself imagine a future where this was normal, where having someone who stayed wasn't extraordinary, where being loved wasn't something she had to earn through constant proving. It was the bravest thing she'd ever done. The weeks that followed brought a different kind of work. The slow, steady rebuilding of a life that had been held together by desperation and stubbornness. Clara and Elias worked the ranch together, planning for spring, repairing winter damage, and slowly transforming Clara's failing homestead into something sustainable. Western Frontier Holdings collapsed 3 months later, destroyed by their own reputation and a territorial investigation that uncovered fraud across 4 counties. Pemberton fled to California. His silent companion disappeared entirely. The ranchers they'd targeted started rebuilding, and the valley slowly healed from the damage. Clara's father improved steadily as winter released its grip. By March, he was strong enough to work the forge again, shoeing horses and taking on small repair jobs that brought in steady income. He watched Clara and Elias work together with something like satisfaction, occasionally offering commentary that was usually inappropriate and always accurate. "You two are going to get married," he announced one evening over dinner. Clara choked on her coffee. "Pa, don't paw me. I'm old and dying and I can say what I want." "You're not dying anymore," Clara pointed out. "I'm still old, and I'm still right. You're going to marry this man, and I'm going to live long enough to see it." Elias, to his credit, didn't look uncomfortable, just amused. "Is that a prediction or a demand?" "Both." James pointed at him with a fork. "You're good for her. She's good for you. Stop dancing around it and make it official before the whole territory dies of suspense." Clara wanted to argue, but the truth was her father was right. She and Elias had been building towards something for months. Partnership that had become friendship, that had become something deeper and more complicated and infinitely more terrifying. "We're taking our time," Clara said. "You're stalling," James corrected. "There's a difference." After dinner, Clara and Elias walked to the eastern pasture to check on the cattle. The spring grass was starting to show through the melting snow, and the herd looked healthy and content. In a few weeks, they'd drive them to the railroad for sale. The profits would be enough to not just save the ranch, but expand it. "Your father's not subtle," Elias observed. "He never has been." "Is he right?" Clara stopped walking, turning to face him. "About what?" "About us. About marriage." Her heart started pounding. "Are you asking?" "I'm asking if you'd want me to ask." "That's the most convoluted proposal I've ever heard." "It's not a proposal, it's reconnaissance." Despite everything, Clara smiled. "You're ridiculous." "That's not an answer." Clara looked at him, this man who'd defended her publicly, worked beside her constantly, and loved her imperfectly, but completely. This man who'd seen all her broken pieces and decided they were worth keeping. "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes, what?" "Yes, I'd want you to ask. Someday. When I'm ready." "When will that be?" "I don't know. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe 6 months from now. Maybe when I finally believe I deserve this." Elias stepped closer, taking her hands. "You deserve this. You've always deserved this. The world just took too long to give it to you. You make it sound simple." "It is simple. I love you. You're starting to trust that. Everything else is just details." Clara's throat went tight. "I don't know how to be someone's wife. I don't know how to be soft or domestic or any of the things women are supposed to be." "Good. Because I don't want someone soft or domestic. I want you, stubborn, difficult, completely unwilling to make things easy for anyone. You're going to regret this. Never. Elias pulled her closer. Ask me again in 50 years. I'll give you the same answer. They stood in the spring pasture, surrounded by healthy cattle and melting snow, and Clara let herself believe in possibility. Not certainty. She'd learned the hard way that certainty was a luxury, but possibility. The chance that someone could love her not despite her imperfections, but because of them. Elias Boone proposed properly 3 months later, on a summer evening when the valley was gold with sunset and the ranch was thriving. He did it without fanfare or grand gestures, just a simple question asked in the barn while they were checking on a newborn calf. Marry me. Clara looked up from the calf, startled. Now? Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow. Next year. I don't care. Just say you'll marry me eventually. She wanted to be coy, to make him work for it, to protect herself one more time from the vulnerability of saying yes. But she was tired of protecting herself from good things. Yes. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Eventually. Elias smiled, the genuine smile he saved for moments that mattered. Eventually works for me. They married in September, in a simple ceremony on Clara's ranch with her father and a handful of trusted friends as witnesses. Clara wore a dress she'd made herself, practical and sturdy and completely inappropriate for a wedding. Elias wore his best suit and looked uncomfortable and perfect. The ceremony was brief. The celebration was quiet. And when they exchanged vows, Clara promised to love Elias imperfectly, to challenge him constantly, and to never pretend to be anything other than exactly who she was. Elias promised to stay, to fight beside her instead of for her, and to love her whether she believed she deserved it or not. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. But it was honest, and that mattered more. The years that followed weren't easy. The ranch had good seasons and bad seasons. Western Frontier's collapse left a power vacuum that other opportunists tried to fill. Clara and Elias fought, loudly and often, about business decisions and personal matters and things that didn't matter at all. But they fought together, built together, survived together. Clara never became the woman society expected her to be. She stayed stubborn and difficult and completely unwilling to compromise her principles for comfort. She ran the ranch with an iron hand and a sharp tongue, and people learned to respect her not despite her rough edges, but because of them. Elias built his empire into something sustainable and ethical, using his influence to protect struggling ranchers instead of exploiting them. He remained slightly ridiculous, absolutely devoted, and completely uninterested in conventional expectations. James Whitmore lived another 12 years, long enough to see his daughter transform from a woman nobody wanted into a legend the whole territory talked about. He died peacefully in the cabin he'd built, surrounded by family, having watched his stubborn daughter prove that worth wasn't measured by waistlines or bank accounts or society's approval. Clara stood at his grave and didn't cry. She'd learned from her father that strength wasn't about hiding emotion, it was about surviving it. So she grieved honestly and loudly and without apology, and then she got back to work. Because that's what survivors did. They got back to work. 20 years after that winter when everything changed, travelers crossing Montana territory still told stories about Clara Whitmore Boone, the woman who'd been mocked in a mercantile and had built an empire anyway. They talked about the impossible cattle drive that saved the valley. They talked about the partnership that became a marriage that became a legacy. But Clara's favorite story was simpler. It was about a woman who'd been told she wasn't worth loving, and a man who'd decided to prove everyone wrong. It was about choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. It was about building something real from broken pieces and stubbornness and the refusal to surrender. And whenever people asked Clara what made her relationship with Elias work, she always gave the same answer. We stopped pretending to be anything other than who we are. Turns out that's enough. She never used the word love without qualifiers, never claimed their marriage was perfect, never pretended the journey had been anything other than difficult and messy and completely imperfect. But it was real, and real was worth more than perfect ever could be. Years later, when Clara was old and weathered and still running the ranch with the same stubborn determination she'd had at 26, young women would come to her asking for advice about marriage and success and survival. Clara would tell them the truth. That worth wasn't something granted by other people. It was something you claimed for yourself. That being difficult wasn't a flaw if you were difficult in the service of something meaningful. That love wasn't about finding someone who completed you. It was about finding someone who respected you enough to let you stay incomplete. And that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let someone stay. The ranch still stood, expanded and prosperous, a testament to what could be built when two stubborn people decided to stop fighting alone. The valley had changed, modernized, become something different than the brutal frontier where Clara had fought for survival. But some things remained constant. The mountains still stood, the winters still came hard and mean, and Clara Whitmore Boone still woke every morning, looked at the man sleeping beside her, and chose to stay. Not because it was easy, not because it was perfect, but because it was real and honest and worth every difficult moment it took to build. And in the end, that was enough. That was always enough.